I'm going to steal a famous line from the James Bond franchise as we talk about at the start of today's show. And what is it? Well, apparently BYU's next star basketball player could be coming from Russia with love.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, your resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I appreciate all of you who we like to call everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. This is your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars, and today's show is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Make every moment more with FanDuel today. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonuses with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started today. All right, let's dive right in on today's show, and I'll just say this right off the top. The rumors involving Egor Demin continue to absolutely go bananas, everybody. If you've been paying attention over the weekend, the rumors have been flying from multiple reporters in Europe, in the Euroleagues, and here's the deal. BYU is absolutely in the mix for potentially maybe their best single recruiting win in recent memory. Now, that's saying something considering BYU's had a number of high-level athletes who have committed to BYU over the years. You can go back all the way to the Sean Bradley era if you want, because Bradley coming out of Castledale, Utah, and Emory High School at 7'6" was a phenom in his own right. But Egor Demin, if I can get that name out of my mouth correctly, looks like he, for all intents and purposes, could be on his way to BYU. The reports are that he is intent on leaving Real Madrid and is intent on playing college basketball this next season. And I can tell you this much. What I know is that BYU is absolutely in the mix for Demin. There are other programs out there like Arkansas who are in the mix. Illinois, funny enough, was the first one to kind of lift the lid on BYU and Demin and the potential that Kevin Young and BYU could get in the mix for this young man. But this would be an absolute home run addition for the BYU basketball program. I think I'm saying this out of line when I say if Egor Demin decides to play for BYU, he may be BYU's best player on their roster right now. That's how good this kid is. He is considered to be a first-round draft pick in next year's NBA draft. So if everything goes according to plan, he essentially play at BYU. He was a one-and-done this season, and off to the NBA he would go. But he has got the type of talent that could really make BYU into a Big 12 contender. This is a young man who recently completed play the Euroleague ANGT tournament. It's essentially a tournament that is supposed to feature the best young talent across Europe and give them an opportunity to play tournament style. And he led Real Madrid to the championship. And in that championship game, he just tallied 26 points, 11 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 steals, and 2 blocks. An incredible talent this kid is. 6'8" or 6'9", depending on which reports you look at, has the ability to play a point guard role where he can distribute the basketball, but has also got the size to play out on the wing. This is a phenomenal talent that BYU very well may be in on. And Kevin Young, what else can this guy not do as BYU head coach? He has said that he wants to open a European pipeline. Well, you want to break down the door of the European pipeline or really break the dam open? Get a guy like this who you can mold and potentially have him be a top 10 draft pick next year, because there are people saying that he has that type of talent, speaking of Demin. And that would be just incredible to see that type of a kid gracing the Marriott Center, even if it was just for one season. You get him for 20 some odd home games at the very most, it'd still be worth it in every sense of the word for the BYU Cougars. This is the type of talent that could really push BYU towards being a Big 12 contender next season. I'm not even joking about that. Now, obviously, there's a lot of people out there wondering what Jackson Robinson is going to do. The timeline, or the deadline, I should say, with regards to his future, with regards to the NBA draft, he's got to make that decision here pretty quick. So we'll soon find out what he's intent on doing. If he's going to stick in the pro ranks, he's going to try and go in the NBA draft, or if he will return to college. And I was told yesterday that there is still a chance against all odds. And trust me, you guys have known who I've been talking to. I've been talking about this. You know who I've been talking to. Sources who have said that Jackson Robinson was not intent on returning to BYU. What I have been told is that Kevin Young believes that he can win Jackson Robinson over, bring him back to BYU, and really sell him on the fact that he can get him ready better than anybody else for the NBA draft. And I'm just saying the Jackson Robinson thing, because if you were to get Jackson Robinson on the wing alongside a guy like Egor Demin here on this BYU roster, that's 2 NBA level wings playing for you in the Big 12, which with those two, that would be an absolute nightmare for opposing teams to try to defend. You put a Dallin Hall out there with his ability to distribute the basketball and be that floor general alongside them, and then you're really just cooking with lightning at that point. I'm mixing and matching my metaphors, but regardless, it's a home run waiting to happen if this can all work out for BYU. Now, there's a lot of moving parts because a lot of other teams in the mix for both Demin and also Jackson Robinson. But if that were to come to fruition, think about how good that team could be. Demin himself, I think, pushes BYU more in the conversation of being a top 4 type team in the Big 12 next year. He is that talented of a prospect. And before you go to any of the message boards out there and say that Jake Hatch is saying that Demin is committed to BYU, I do not know that. Let me be very clear about that. There are reports saying that BYU, he's accepted a scholarship. I know there was one in Spanish that came out. We'll see if that comes true. And that would be, like I said, it's awesome if they can do that. But there's a massive, massive number being attached to this NIL-wise. $1.5 million allegedly in NIL funds. And there's also expected to be a buyout to get him out of his contract with Real Madrid. Now, the Real Madrid thing, it's normal. Most of these young talents who play for these EuroLeague clubs, they keep their eligibility intact, but they do have a contract in place to protect the franchise they're coming from. Think back even to, also one other thing. The Real Madrid franchise, do you know who some of the talents that have come out of that team have been that have gone in the NBA? Some incredible players, none bigger than Luka Doncic. He's got his team on the cusp of going to the NBA Finals. He was a star for Real Madrid and then ultimately jumped into the NBA draft, and the rest is history, as they say, with what he has done for Dallas so far in his career. That's the type of talent that Real Madrid adds, and Egor Demin looks like that type of a potential player in next year's NBA draft. That's the type of talent that BYU could be adding. Now, so ostensibly, you're paying $1.5 million in NIL. You're paying a buyout that maybe make up the $2 million. There was an original report from Illinois insiders and fans that were saying that BYU was willing to pay $2 million for Demin. Well, that may be the number you have to get get this kid to consider BYU. So if you can get him, get him. You're going to have to pay quite a bit through the nose NIL-wise to get him. Make it happen, because this is the type of talent, like I said, that pushes BYU over the top, and we'll see where it ultimately lands, but it's awesome. It's incredible to consider what Kevin Young is doing as BYU head coach. He is just absolutely kicking down doors that seem to be closed to BYU left and right and saying, you know what? Nothing is out of reach for what we can accomplish in Provo. All right, another guy that could be joining the BYU basketball program is a little more close to home, but has been calling Piscataway, New Jersey, home for the last couple of seasons. What does Mawot Mag offer to the BYU basketball program? We're talking about him next, right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL playoffs, my friend, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. With everything going on right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. Think about that. It's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. You think the Boston Celtics are a team of destiny going to roll their way to the NBA Finals? Go and put your money on it right now. Even if you don't know who they're going to play in the NBA Finals, you got that belief in them, please do it. You can go over to FanDuel.com and put that money down right now. Or you can make a pick on tonight's game. Where you think it's going to be Dallas completing the sweep, or if Minnesota can get back into it. Take your chances and do it with our friends at FanDuel right now. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. It's all courtesy of FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. I want to remind you guys that Locked On Sports Today is the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's also available now on the Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app if you want to watch it that way. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league as well. Find Locked On Sports Today available now on the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, or check it out on YouTube. All right. So we just talked about what Egor Demin could offer to BYU, but there is another guy out there that it could be added to the BYU roster. He'd fill a very different role for the Cougars. The name Mawot Mag may not register with you, but he is a transfer, a fifth-year senior, as it were, in the transfer portal that BYU is in on. Robbie McCombs from Anchors of the Foe says it's come down essentially to BYU and San Diego State. Mag visited BYU just before the quiet period began last week, and reading up on Mag and watching a little bit about him is that he is a different player that you would add to the BYU roster because he is not your typical lockdown shooter. He's not a guy who's going to come to BYU and automatically shoot 40% from three. That, in fact, he probably would not be BYU's top five, top six, top seven three-point shooters on this roster. But what he offers is lockdown defense. Reading about him, he is the type of guy who you put out there to lock down the opposing team's best wing. To use an NBA term, remember guys like Lou Dort or back in the day, some of the defensive stoppers that have existed in NBA teams that essentially protect the opposing, protect your best offensive player by not having them play as much defense, but at the same time, you going out and slow down the opposing team's best offensive weapon. That is what Mawot Mag's calling card would be for this BYU basketball team. And I think there would be a very nice place for him in this roster. If he can offer anything in terms of shooting, great. But here's the deal. He doesn't have to be that. You like to have 3-and-D guys. Let's be very clear about that. He's got good size. Speaking of Mag, 6'7", 216 pounds. He is from Melbourne, Australia most recently, but he's originally a native of Sudan. Left during some of the civil wars and the strife that's been going on in the Sudan region there in Africa, and ultimately ended up in Melbourne, Victoria down there in Australia, but has come to the United States and has had some incredible moments. I was reading up on him, and I actually found a video from the Big Ten Network talking about his background and how things have kind of transpired in his life. And this is a kid who has battled through a lot. Now, I'm not saying he's completely inept offensively. He's not, because last season, despite having a knee injury, that's the other thing about this, he was not 100% healthy a year ago. He averaged 9.1 points, 3.8 rebounds, 1.2 assists, and shot 38% from the field. So not awful splits, honestly. And at 6'7", 216, he's got good size to lock down opposing wings. And he's already got experience in the Big Ten. He obviously played against the likes of Purdue. In that video, funny enough, they showed a play where he came down the baseline and got a ball and just absolutely yammed it. So he shows some ability on the pick and roll type stuff, backdoor cuts and the like. So I think this would be another savvy pickup for the Cougars, but you bring him in for a very different reason, kind of maybe opposite of what Egor Demin brings to BYU, where Demin can play that 1, 2, or 3 and is essentially your best offensive weapon in theory. Mawot Mag comes to BYU if you were to pick the Cougars, and he is your defensive stopper. He is your Bruce Bowen. For those of you who are San Antonio Spurs fans, he is the guy who takes on that junkyard dog role. It's not fun because you're obviously going to be expending a lot of energy trying to slow down the opposing team's best player, but at the same time, they serve a very, very key role on this, and I think this would be another solid pickup for BYU. They've got 4 roster slots still to deal with. They got 4 scholarships, and I call them roster slots because we've just essentially done with amateurism. We've done away with amateurism. It's all NIL. It's all money, and I'm sure Mawot Mag, just like a guy like Egor Demin, is looking to secure a bag himself when it comes to NIL, make some money as he finishes up his playing career, but I think you could do a nice job with this. His 3-point percentages throughout his career, speaking of Mag, aren't incredible. I think the high of his career is 33.3% in 12 games as a freshman. So he shot 23.5, 30, and 24.5%. So he's not the premier 3-and-D wing that you have, but he could come to BYU and essentially serve as that defensive stopper and anything you get out of him offensively. Because like I said, he averaged almost 10 points a year ago in 17 games played, almost 8 points in 23 the year before that. So he's not going to light it up offensively, but he offers a skill set that BYU, frankly, doesn't have on the roster right now. There are some guys who are pretty solid defenders, it feels like, but you don't have one of those premier lockdown type defenders. And that is one thing that I think BYU and Kevin Young are understanding and saying, okay, if we put together a pretty good offensive team, we still got to be able to defend on the other end of the glass. And I think we saw at times with what Mark Pope's squad last year had, they were very good defensively, but they did not necessarily have elite defensive players, and that maybe hurt them at times. So I can understand the wisdom and the thought process here from Kevin Young and looking at Mag and saying, okay, could he come to BYU and be the option we need as the stopper in our defensive scheme? Mag, in theory, could play that 4-man role for BYU in that starting lineup where you play a little bit more small ball. BYU starting lineup, in theory, if everything works out, the starting lineup for BYU next season could feature Dallin Hall at 6'4". Let's say Egor Demin picks BYU. He is 6'8" or 6'9". He's probably at that 2 spot. Then at the 3 spot, is it Richie Saunders? Maybe so. And Richie's a good 6'5", 6'6" in his own right. Mawot Mag could be 6'7", could be playing on that wing. Or if Jackson Robinson decides to return, he is a legit 6'5" in, I think, socks, whatever it was, 6'7" in shoes. And then in the front court, it's either Keba Keita or Fousseyni Traore. So you're not necessarily the tallest or longest team out there, but you're pretty athletic. And I think it would be one that would be interesting to watch because maybe you essentially play small ball and run by teams and essentially move the ball around, kick it out for threes, go to the rim and score in transition. That might be more of the offensive philosophy that Kevin Young is looking to deploy at BYU. Maybe he doesn't necessarily need that 6'11" or 7 foot big man, even though I think he needs that. That's just Jake Hatch's scouting report, just looking at what the Big 12 has offered in basketball. But we'll see. There's some interesting prospects out there for BYU, and Kevin Young, once again, continues to look at all options out there, and it seems like he's taking a really well-rounded approach to this, trying to find the best combination of players he can to fill out this roster, and if it comes where he gets the roster to where he likes it, yeah, there's no reason to think that it's not going to be a Big 12 contender because that is the type of talent that is on the table for BYU to land, and we'll see if it all plays out that way. There is, like I said, there's money and all kinds of conversations to be had before guys ultimately sign their documents, the national letters of intent or whatever else they have to sign as international prospects. But I think BYU is on the right track right now. Now can they seal the deal and get the right guys in place and ultimately establish BYU in the Big 12 pecking order? That is kind of the next box to be checked along the way for the BYU basketball program. All right, we'll finish up today's edition of the podcast. Coming up next, we are going to look at an interesting story involving BYU's arch rival. Are the Utah Utes, really considering going to the ACC? Let's talk about it coming up in just a moment right here on Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. If you've not done so already, please sign up for our Locked On Cougars Insider Group. It's a great way to interact with the show, get live updates from me directly sent to you via text message. You can fire back with text messages of your own and get your thoughts to me, and we can exchange thoughts back and forth. And also, you can support the show as well. 14-day free trial to see if it's the right option for you, but just $4.99 a month, essentially $5 a month after that to stay in the group. But hope you guys will consider it, and you can join it by clicking on the link in the show notes below, whether you're watching and or listening to this. It'd be a fun way for you guys to be a part, an even bigger part of Locked On Cougars. All right, let's talk about an interesting story. Dick Weiss, New York Daily News, covers basketball mainly, but he is like a veteran voice out there in college circles. And he says this, quote, "Speculation is circulating about potential shifts in college sports conferences. There's discussion about Utah possibly moving to the ACC despite its recent move to the Big 12, with some suggesting the ACC might be a better fit due to its ESPN network agreement and potential for increased TV value. However, skepticism exists regarding the stability and attractiveness of the ACC compared to the Big 12. This is Dick Weiss writing this on Twitter or X, depending on what you want to call it. Okay, on its head. Utah wants to leave the Big 12 for the ACC before even taking part in the Big 12? Go for it. Just go. Here's the deal. Utah is not happy being in the Big 12. It is evident at every level. Fans, administration, the coaches, they just put off this feeling that the Big 12 is not good enough for them. Here's the deal also. If you go to the ACC is a sinking ship, everybody. If you've been paying attention to anything going on, the ACC essentially has Clemson and Florida State trying to engineer a mutiny to break themselves out of that conference so they can go pitch themselves to the highest bidder and cash in on media rights deals, potentially with the SEC or the Big Ten. And they're not the only ones. I'm sure there are other programs and other schools in the ACC right now are hoping that Clemson and Florida State succeed in their litigation against the conference. And then essentially just everything is jailbreak and off you go, off to the highest bidder. If Utah wants to jump onto that sinking ship, go right on ahead. Do it, because you're jumping, like you said, on a sinking ship. And if you think that is your best play, more power to you. I do not get the wisdom in this if you're Utah in any way, shape, or form, because that just seems like just a death blow to your athletics program. If you jump into the ACC right now when it's shaky at best of what the future of the ACC is going to be. Now, I will also, I'm sure there's going to be Utah fans going to be jumping into my mentions when I talk about this. Let me be very clear. Kyle Whittingham has been right about the future of college athletics for a long time. I don't know who Kyle's talking to. He talks to people far more in the know than I do. I know that. And Kyle has said that there is coming essentially the mega conferences, for lack of a better term. We've seen the SEC and the Big Ten try and make their first forays into creating two rival gigantic power conferences that are the top two dogs in the college sports universe. Yes, Utah wants to be part of that. Yes, BYU wants to be a part of that. Anybody in the Big 12 or the ACC wants to be a part of that if that ultimately is where it's going to go. But if you think, if you're Utah and you think jumping to the ACC is going to get you into that faster, go right on ahead, because that just seems like a really, really short-sighted move trying to get to your ultimate goal. Why not go into the Big 12 if you're Utah? Dominate the league like you believe you're going to. And I got no reason to believe that Utah is not going to dominate in football, at least this year, because there's no reason to think that they're not. If they're not the favorite in the Big 12 this fall, they're top 3 at the very worst. And I'm saying that as a guy who does a BYU podcast. I'm saying that right now. Utah, if they're not picked as the Big 12 favorite at Big 12 Media Days, I'll be floored. But at the very worst, they're going to be number 3, it feels like, in their voting. That is how good of a season it appears Kyle Whittingham and the Utes could have this year. But if their administration, led by, what's his name, Mark Harlan, skip my mind for a minute. If Mark Harlan thinks that joining the ACC is going to get Utah to, in their minds, maybe the Big 10 or whatever, getting themselves into that mega conference mode, it just doesn't seem the right play to me, because the ACC is going to go down in a flaming heap of rubble right now. And essentially they're going to be picked off team by team. And if you're in the ACC for a short time and maybe you're not necessarily as competitive as you thought you were going to be, you get left behind, and then you're having to pick up the pieces with a clearly weakened ACC, and you're trying to put it back together with Cal and Stanford and SMU and Boston College, Syracuse. Like, what does the future hold there? It does not make any sense to me for Utah to make this move. But if you want, by all means, go right on ahead. BYU will sit in the Big 12 and they will do their thing. There's that report out there. There's a contract that Utah wasn't willing to sign. Essentially, they call it the blood oath. Some people have called it a 99-year essential agreement with these conferences. We've seen in this day and age that these conferences can be morphed and molded and changed at a moment's notice, it feels like. And maybe they didn't sign that, and maybe they have intentions of going to the Big 10, but this I'm not sure what you're thinking. If that in your mind, if you're Utah, if your best play in your mind is to jump to the ACC, you really are discontent with the Big 12 in a big way. And I don't get it, because the Big 12, yes, it may not be the prestige of the Pac-12. And I get all of that, because the Pac-12 had those markets, those glamour franchises, as it were, in USC and UCLA and Washington and Oregon and all. I get all that. But guess what? The Pac-12 was going down, and you needed to find a place to some safe refuge. If you want to spurn that right now and make the jump to a conference, like I said, that has got its maybe 2 premier franchises or brands trying to jailbreak themselves out of that conference, you're asking for trouble. That does not seem like the prudent move for Utah to make. And I don't think that Dick Weiss is talking to anybody that he doesn't. He wouldn't say that just because. Here's the thing: he's based in New York. He covers college basketball. What does Dick Weiss gain from saying that Utah may be willing to jump to the ACC? Very, very little. He's not some try-hard Joe Blow here in Utah who's trying to make a name for himself in media circles and on social media. That's not what Dick Weiss is in this for. He has covered college basketball forever. He is one of the veteran voices out there when it comes to college hoops. And so very, very interesting report, but it just seems very short-sighted if you're Utah to make that move. Now, speaking of the Pac-12, it held its final athletic contest with the Pac-12 men's baseball tournament wrapping up. So RIP to the Pac-12. It'll cease essentially operations in its current form coming up as of, I think it's like June 30 is when it ultimately all goes down. But I also want to say in terms of the Pac-12, RIP Bill Walton. Now, Bill obviously was a proponent of the Pac-12, would get all that, but Bill Walton was an absolute legend in all facets. I am a kid who grew up watching him when he did the NBA on NBC way back in the 90s. I have watched him for years doing ESPN broadcasts. Dave Pasch was seemingly more annoyed than any other human being ever could doing broadcasts with Bill, but at the same time having the time of his life, it seemed like. Bill Walton was a larger-than-life character, both literally and figuratively, and we're going to miss him. So I didn't have many opportunities to meet Mr. Walton. I only said hi to him a couple of times at a couple of different BYU basketball games, but you can tell that there was a genuine nature to him. He was a unique individual, and he was not afraid to let his uniqueness shine through. I was incredible to hear that he had a prolonged battle with cancer, because I was at the BYU Utah basketball game this past winter when he was calling that game for the Pac-12 network, and I was doing my media responsibilities after the game. He sat down there on media row and talked to literally anybody who wanted to talk to him for at least a good hour, if not longer than that. And then after the game wrapped up, and he was one of the last people to leave when people stopping by to give him well wishes, say hello, talk with him, whatever it was. And I frankly, I thought about going down and talking to him, but like I said, I was dealing with some other media stuff I was doing. I wish I would have taken that opportunity. I really wish I would have taken the opportunity to go down and say hi to him. It's incredible to consider what he accomplished in 71 years of life. This is a guy who was one of the best, maybe single best basketball players of his generation, hampered by foot injuries in the NBA, still ultimately won a title in the 80s with the Boston Celtics, as well as the title he won with the Portland Trail Blazers. Man, it's just, there are larger than life, like I said, characters out there in sports media that I look up to, and none more so than Bill Walton. You may not have liked his style of broadcasting. I thought it was absolutely unique. I enjoyed it. It was, you never knew what was going to come out of his mouth. There was a famous quote when he did a BYU game, I don't know how many years ago, where he's doing the game, and essentially, I don't remember who his broadcast partner was. He says, "Hey, have you ever heard of the Blue Henry Mountains in Utah?" Just, who talks about the Blue Henry Mountains in Utah on a basketball broadcast? But that's Bill Walton. So rest in peace, big man. I really think the world is going to miss out on Bill, and thoughts and prayers and well wishes go out to his family and friends at this time. All right, that's what we're going to do. We're going to wrap it up there on this Tuesday edition of the podcast. Good to be back in the saddle. We'll see if good news continues to roll in for BYU basketball. We'll continue to cover it in the coming days. It's incredible to think we're at the end of May, but things seem to just be heating up more and more for the BYU basketball program. But hey, as we do, we'll have you covered top to bottom right here on Locked On Cougars as you roll on into the ostensibly off season, but it doesn't really feel like an off season at all right now. All right, that's going to do it. Big thank you to all of you for your making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day. Thank you to all of you who are everydayers as well. And until tomorrow, everybody, have a great rest of your day. This has been the Locked On Cougars podcast.